Hey everybody, I'm Brianna. I'm here with Chichi and Mike again for the block under construction. We are talking about this next city post. It was basically a post about a podcast covering Princeville, which is located in North Carolina. And essentially, they were talking about how this Black community is having some troubles being able to rebuild after a large flood and a large storm that came through. Because of that, there has been some activism from Black folks who are from that area who are really trying to make sure that the history of that town is preserved, whether that means rebuilding, whether that means to fixing the levee system, or if that means that there's some type of alternative solution to preserving that culture. So I wanted to just bounce this around to everybody and think about how that might relate. Again, Princeville is one of the oldest Black communities that were founded in the late 1800s. And it's one of those places where, the culture was rich, the culture is still there. People are still remembering their childhood, remembering things that happened in that community, and have lived there, trying to make sure that that community stays intact before the storm happened. And so obviously in 2020, there has been a push to try to keep that going. And then there's been some discussions with Spaces and Places. And then there's a film coming out, a documentary called Freedom Hill, in which they will be discussing Princeville. So I'll turn this over to Mike and Chi Chi to discuss a little bit more, and then I'll add my 2 cents.
Okay, cool. So one of the things that I thought about, and I will say, and I always feel so bad when I think this, when I see things like this happen, right? Okay, so let's take like Hurricane Katrina, think about that, and just think about like other, cities that you've seen like pretty much go underwater or have like severe damage due to like floods. And then you always hear about, well, the state or, the local government was warning residents, ahead of time, telling them like, okay, be prepared for this because this could be like really devastating. And I think not realizing your privilege when you don't live in an area that floods like that, your selfish thinking, I'll just speak for myself. My selfish thinking is like, well, why wouldn't they just move? Like, why wouldn't they just leave? Or why wouldn't they just like, you've got this warning that something is about to happen and you stay, right? So when I first, read the article about this particular city, and after reading it, that was one of the things that I thought. But for the first time, thinking as a planner, I was thinking about, well, man, like people, are attached. There's like sentimental things. There's, like history, right? Not just not necessarily like a person's tangible personal history, but like the history of the place, and the space and things like that. And thinking along those lines, as those being reasons for people to not just pick up and leave. The other thing is from a privileged standpoint, like if you have the finances to move and rebuild somewhere else, then, picking up and moving somewhere else, would and could be something that you could do. But if you're not someone who is, in the financial position to do that, then you don't have an option. It's like, okay, we just got to prepare and figure out how we're going to rebuild once this, once this thing takes place. So that's something that those are things that I was thinking about, like as I was reading the article. The other thing was that, I don't think that obviously it doesn't come across like major like news outlets, right? I feel like unless you're like working in this space, then you might hear stories about like historic preservation a lot more, obviously. But how often do we know of places or hear places where maybe it could be like a natural disaster, or it could be that a city wants to do something else with, land or property that happens to hold historic value in the, Black community. And it made me think about, well, if this was happening, it's, like happening somewhere else, right? Where America felt like, man, this is like one of our, historical monuments, or like a really super important place to American history, right? How much more would people be willing to make sure that that particular thing did not get destroyed, right? And oftentimes when it comes to the Black community or communities of color, like things that are important to us, we're usually the ones that have to figure out how to fix something and make it work. And sometimes it's only if you have, I feel, people in other spaces who are not people of color, who just so happen to be like very empathetic, where they want to pick up the mantle, or they want to come in and like help. So that was something that, something else that I was thinking about as I like learned about this place, which is, like those things about, people not having the privilege to pick up and leave, people, being attached to something that's, important to them. And then, Black people, not only do we often go to everybody else's rescue, but, we're often like trying to rescue ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my 2 cents.
I was just going to say too, Detroit, New Orleans, all of these places had the same situation. I would say New Orleans is more similar to Princeville in terms of the flooding. But you have these areas of disinvestment. You have folks who have been there trying to preserve the culture and the history there. And then people who just don't care unless it's concerning them. But Mike, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, Chichi, I think that you illustrated a really good spectrum in terms of like how communities deal with things like this, either if it's like a natural disaster or just disinvestment, lack of economic activity or stability, whatever that is, right? So I think innately humans are connected to places, right? And geography and land and houses and where we grew up, and that the big oak tree in the front yard, whatever, right? You know what I mean? I think innately it's just connected to the human experience to place experience with, environment, right? And then on the other, and maybe in the middle of the spectrum, you have those, neighborhood historians and gatekeepers and people who, remember the yesteryears of the neighborhood or the community and want to preserve those things, but don't know how, right? Don't know where to start or have the tools or even the economic, wherewithal to make things even happen, but they still stay. We hear about that a lot in Detroit, like people that they just never left, right? The old guard, right? And then you have all the way over here is the people who have that innate human connection, want to, secure the area and make it stable and know the history and whatever. And they also have the economic wherewithal and understand the playing field on how to make that stuff happen in terms of historic preservation, right? And so I think everyone along that line has a role to play when it comes to creating the stability of said community, right? If you think about like New Orleans, right? Now that was a very environmentally heavy tragedy, right? It was a breaking of the levees, it was a hurricane, thousands of people lost their lives, hundreds of thousands displaced, right? You had a mixture of everything, right? The historic preservation, the people with the economic wherewithal, the people who just don't want to leave, right? And then the people who just basically need a place to live, right? I think all of those individuals play a role in the rebirth of an area. And, when we think about our city, I think that as planners, we really need to sharpen our pencils and get more knowledgeable about what historic preservation actually means, right? Like Brianna, if I need to understand a capital stack and getting affordable housing moving, I know I can hit, Brianna up. If I want to know about some plans that are going on in specific areas and strategic neighborhood fund, I know I can hit you up, right? And so we need to really sharpen our pencils when it comes to that historic preservation, but also not leave people out of the equation, right? I think everyone along that spectrum has a very vital role to play when it comes to preserving these places and also reintroducing places to a new generation that may not appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you guys totally. I think, a couple of these things that we talk about, and we have talked about in our previous conversation, were about historic preservation, highlighting areas that may have seen disinvestment over time. We talked a little bit last time about Russell Woods. We talked a little bit last time about Brightmoor. And once again, another example from the Russell Woods neighborhood being that Dexter Avenue used to be a place where there was a lot of jazz venues, a lot of speakeasies, a lot of things that Black people who were of like the quote unquote Black middle class in Detroit, they attended those spots, right? They went to those theaters, they went to those restaurants and things of that nature that were there, the bowling alleys and the Saunders ice cream that was there. And all of those buildings are gone. Every single one of them. Every single one. If you see, pictures of what the theater looked like from the interior, like all of that history is gone. Not a piece of tile left. And I think about that. And I think about what that means to someone who's lived there their whole life, maybe have experienced that, and it's all gone, and people just don't seem to care. And when they advocate for their community, they advocate for people to, invest in their community so that they can salvage what is left. Folks say, well, that's unfortunate,
Yeah.
nothing we can do. We only got this X amount of money. But you think about places like New Orleans, for example. New Orleans is a good example. Let me hit you with this. So you had those areas in New Orleans that were flooded, right? Those areas didn't really see a lot of development come after the hurricane, right? But the areas that were on higher ground, those areas are booming now. Okay, they got all types of HGTV shows about, selling the Big Easy, and you got all of that stuff going on. And shout out to Brittany on that show, because I love that show and she is so awesome. Even though, like I said, you got people selling all these high priced property. But then you have these areas that don't really get highlighted, you really don't see, or you really don't talk about, and they're still struggling and recovering from the hurricane. And so the same thing in Detroit. You have areas of Detroit that are really still struggling from the economic instabilities that have happened over the years. And nobody's coming to the rescue of that because they only focusing on this little area of development that's somewhat popping now, and that's a problem. It's a real problem, because the longer that we wait to invest in those areas, the longer it's going to take for folks to realize that, oh, like we just lost all of this history. We just lost all of this, historic stuff that we could have preserved and utilized in a different way. But it's all gone now because we waited 15 years to really, put into that neighborhood. So I will say, if you guys think about, I want to raise this question to you all. How many Black historic preservationists do y'all know?
I know they out there.
Yeah, they out there somewhere, but not in Detroit.
I gotta shout out to Karen Burton and I know there's that's a good question. That is a great question. But before we kind of dig into that really quick, and I'm gonna call some people to the carpet, not people, but who should be these people, right? So you named New Orleans, right? And the name and the person that comes to mind is Wendell Pierce, right? Wendell Pierce, Waiting to Exhale, Selma, bunch of movies. Everybody, you know the face, right? Wendell Pierce, right? New Orleans through and through. I most interviews featuring Wendell Pierce, you know, he's talking about New Orleans. He's talking about the food. He's talking about the culture. He's talking about the history, right? And not only that, post Katrina, he was building houses. He was down there. He moved down there. He started working from down there. He brought movies to New Orleans, right? Who is that Wendell Pierce for the city of Detroit? I mean, Barry Gordy, where you at? You know what I mean? Like, I'm saying, who is that? I mean, I'm saying, like, who is that national advocate for the city of Detroit when it comes to this historic preservation? These are people that need to understand the yesteryears of the city. And as much as I appreciate this wonderful city and I learn about it and I research it, I was born in 1987. So it needs to be people that may be a little older than me, right? Who are these national surrogates for the city of Detroit, right? You don't really see that, right? You don't. You see, like, Mark Wahlberg said, I'm gonna open this burger joint, right?
Eminem just opened up a spot.
Eminem opening up a spot, right? But who is that, like? And every time I see Eminem in any type of interview, he's shouting out Detroit, right? So I know we have them, right? Kid Rock, right? But who is that mainstay on the national stage to advocate for these things and be that storyteller, be that continuing, antagonizing kind of reminder for Detroit? I just want to throw that out there because we need that.
And a person of color, right? Because we got an 80% African American city, and we got folks repping harder than it. Not to get me wrong, Big Sean do his thing, T Grizzly, Cash Doll, all of them, they really do rep their city. I will say that. But I'm not just talking about just the rap scene. I'm talking about people who actually are like, look, I know this neighborhood like through and through. This is my hood. You know what I'm saying? Like, not just I'm good in my hood, but just really like I'm willing to stand out there on the line and say, hey, Mayor Duggan, you need to hurry this up, or at least preserve this, put a tarp on it, whatever you need to do to make sure that this stays intact, because this is important. And this ain't just because it's cute. It's because people have lived here, lived this life, and loved this neighborhood. And in order for it to go on, we need to continue this. We need to keep 1000%.
This going.
But do you think, like, speaking of Detroit, right, and we all know like how politics works, but do you think is that we don't have those people that are, like, really advocating, or is it just that, or could it be that they are, but to your point, like, if someone's calling the mayor's office or calling whoever, right, is it that of those people just don't see the value? You know what I'm saying? Like, because I find it hard to believe that it isn't here and that it hasn't been, like, those issues haven't been raised. And this is just from like a really, really surface level. I think about times like as a kid, my parents took us everywhere all the doggone time, every festival, every, I can't even like name all the things, but I remember being in spaces as a child and different people, from different neighborhoods, whether it was an artist or someone who knew about the history of a neighborhood, like people really talking about the things that they were working on, people talking about, the importance of certain places. And the passion that those people had, I just can't imagine that those conversations were not had or are not being had. But it's like, what's happened after, like, those issues have been raised, right? Because one of the things that I was thinking about in that article where it was saying, like, okay, as designers and planners, like, we had all these ideas and we knew what we wanted, but it wasn't until we had like the right person in the room to help make this happen. So is it for, when I think about like Detroit or, other places, the thing that Princeville had again was the right people in the room who
Mm.
who were empathetic towards this is like really important to these residents or to these people, and we really need to try to figure out, you know, what we can do. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
Playing chess. They had architects, they had lawyers at the table saying
right,
this is
they
important.
had emergency managers and things like that. They had you know,
Put the meeting together.
yeah, they had people who dealt with like natural disasters and things like that
Yeah.
at the table. So, you know, for other cities who might be struggling with it, you know, issues of like, you know, preserving like historic places, of, you know, for African Americans and things like that. I wonder, is it that either, you know, like I said, the issues have been raised, but the people who need to care just don't care, or are the people who do care, who can help, you know, make that change, are they not, you know, are they not at the table? Are they not
Is it
involved in
falling on
those,
deaf
you know?
ears? Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
I was
and the other thing I thought about was just, I almost got like tired. And I'll say tired in the sense of like, I was putting myself in those people's shoes, right? Because another thing that I can relate to is like, I tell people all the time, my really close friends that I grew up with, I could count on one hand from elementary school how many still live in Detroit. And my high school friends, like my homegirls, not a one lives in Michigan. And so one of the things that article touched on was like the younger generation, like picking up and moving, right?
mm-hmm.
And, you know, then there's that. So like you have an older generation who's still fighting for, you know, this city. And then you have a younger generation who, you know, when you think about it, it's kind of like when you like, you know, we have children, right? And we're doing, you know, the things that we're doing. And then you hope to pass on those things that are important to you and sacred to you. You pass that on to your child, right? But if your child doesn't want what's sacred to you and important to you, then who,
It
like,
almost no
who,
matter. Yeah.
yeah, like who keeps that going? And so I got tired because I'm thinking about, again, it's like, no, we shouldn't. Brianna, you brought up a point last time we talked about how people are like, oh, well, the city should do this and the city should do that, right? And Black people getting into the habit of, you know, we got to pick up, you know, our own stuff and carry our own stuff. But sometimes that gets tiring. And when I was reading that, I was like, gosh, I'm tired for these people. Because number one, it seems like they've been doing this for a long time, or dealing with this for a long time. Now they're at a place where they got the right people at the table. And they identify, you know, to your point earlier too, some higher ground where they could put like emergency services in certain city service buildings, you know, in this higher ground. But just even that, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's a lot. That is a lot. And I don't know, I just was feeling tired.
So I would say this, because we you know, we're gonna wrap up soon, but I want to go into the be about it situation, right? And that tries us right into that conversation of being about it, right? Because Buck, we should be about it. One is I understand from someone who is, you know, approaching 30, you know, I ain't there yet, but I'm close, you know, right next door. I would say that, you know, it is hard. I am a Detroiter, born and raised, went away for a little while, came back. And I understand like not having certain amenities, safety issues, concerns, and just feeling like, I mean, I'm from this hood, but like, you know, it get a little struggly sometimes when you want to look for a house or look for a place for your kids to lay their head, and, you know, a gunshot ain't gonna come through the window, or, you know, the trash is gonna get picked up on a regular basis. And I don't have to call the city and hound them, you know, about the stray dog that's walking down the street, you know, that sort of thing. I know that gets hard, but it's also like, you know, the more people that are in this neighborhood, that are pushing this neighborhood forward, seems to drive economic investment, right? Like, hey, if you don't have anybody living over there, why would they care about that old lady that stayed over there for 30, 40 years and she the only house left on the block, right? Versus someone where it's like, oh, okay, well, we have a whole block of people that are not getting their trash picked up. Maybe I should, call somebody and make sure that that happens, because this neighborhood is a voting area, right? Because politics is all about where the money at and where the voters at, right? Okay, I got constituents who are going to, put money toward my campaign, or who are going to vote for me in the next election. So maybe I should make them happy. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And so if you put your money where your mouth is, you put your voting rights where your mouth is, then you can push some stuff along. So that's one way to be about it. Second way of being about it is what Michael said as well earlier, is having somebody that's a national advocate for this particular community, right? Detroit. We have folks who rep their city, wherever they go, they have some ideas about what they would like to do in terms of business ventures and things like that in Detroit. But really just saying, hey, like, look, Detroit is one of these areas where there's a lot of Black people that are doing good things, doing great things, and we want to preserve the history of this particular neighborhood for X reason, that we don't have. So do you guys have any other ways that people can probably be about it?
I think storytelling and narrative is so strong, and it's so accessible right now. I mean, even what we're doing with technology and the internet, social media, storytelling does so much, right? And I do want to say this. I was watching, somebody sent me a clip of Kevin Samuels, and it was interesting because he asked a young lady where she may want to move or live, and she didn't live in Michigan. I think she lived somewhere in the South somewhere, and she said that she would want to move to Detroit. And Kevin Samuels was just like, why would you ever want to move to Detroit? Right. And it was terrible. And as a resident of this city, like, I took offense to that. You know what I mean? And I think that most people who have a dog in this race, if you will, or are trying to push the narrative of Detroit, they should have came for him. You know what I mean? Like, in my opinion, because that's the storytelling. That's when you create dialogue to expand on what this young lady was thinking. Clearly, she had caught wind of a narrative that was attractive to her. You know what I mean? Somewhere, somehow, somebody curated a story that got introduced to her, and she liked it to the point where she would be on a popular syndicated platform, and that was her first answer, right?
And shout out to the Detroit storytellers too. I want to say that
yes,
too. Are some
100%.
here, and I've heard great things about y'all. I haven't met you personally, but I want to shout y'all out.
100%. And to Chi-Chi's point, like, feeling tired for people, like, you grew up here, none of your friends are here, right? And so clearly what's going to bring you to this city is something different than it's close to where I live, right? It may be some economic reasons, like houses are cheaper. That's why I'm here for sure. Because I ain't gonna have all this square footage nowhere else, right? And
That's
not no historic home in an historic neighborhood. It's not happening, right? So clearly there's gonna be some things beyond the natural reason of why we migrate where we migrate as humans, right? That's the storytelling, right? And so I think we need to be about that. And I think that we also need to defend. We need to defend our city. We need to defend the narrative. And we need to support people that, are considering our city to live or do business in. I think we talked about this a little bit last time. Is like, where's our visitors bureau? Like, I mean, I'm not saying these entities don't exist. I know, like, I'm not saying they don't. I'm not calling out the mayor's office or the government or anything. What I'm saying is, like, they need to be more visible, because I am an advocate of the city. Like, I am looking for these things. And so if I can't find them after 3 or 4 clicks, that's a problem. And so we need to have more of that presence. We need to have more of a visitors bureau. We need to have more ambassadors, right? Bringing people to the city, showing it off, right? I think that narrative storytelling and advocacy and ambassadorship for this city can go a long way.
You guys both said it well. I feel like I have nothing to add to that. The only thing I could think about though was just like how you talked about ambassadors. I was just thinking about, like when you really like something, when you really want something, you'll do it even when you're tired. And you'll also seek out like minds, right? So I think it's just about like seeking out those who are like-minded in that endeavor. Like, hey, if preserving Black spaces is important to me, then I'm going to do everything that I can to be, in every historic preservation conversation, whether that's a commission or organization. I'm going to find, others in other cities who have done it and who I can, either partner with or get like some type of mentorship to see like what the next steps in my city, what I should do in my city. So that kind of thing. So when I think about, okay, what are some action steps? Like those would be action steps to me.
And shout out
And
to Dickens, I was about to say, who is an advocate for her city in Princeville.
Okay. I was going to say, Mike mentioned two names that made me go like this. Oh, he said Kevin Samuels and he said Kid Rock. I was like, oh.
Sorry about that. I mean, definitely not, number one fans of either one, but that I seen that clip from Kevin and it's just
I heard about that. I heard about that because he was saying Detroit has like some of the a guy was saying that where could he like find women or something like that, and he was naming all the cities where the women were the most difficult, and like Detroit was number one on the list. I'm like, Kevin Samuels clearly has something against Detroit.
I mean, he said something like the river. I mean, because I think that we get confused with Flint a lot, you know what I mean, because of the proximity or whatever. But he said something about like the water catching on fire or something. Which again is ridiculous, you know what I mean? And just incendiary, like it's not positive. And it's a lot of Black folks here. So I think that again, in using platforms like this, right? Like, I'm like, don't come from my city, you know what I mean? And if you don't know,
ask somebody,
you know what I mean? And for our celebrities that are, national, moving about the city, either on tour or doing whatever, tap, homie on the shoulder and say, hey, that was a kind of ridiculous comment. Can I educate you? I'm not advocating any type of confrontation. What I'm saying is you can politely tap someone on the shoulder. I mean, hey, some people might, trick comes to mind, but you know what I mean? But I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying, hey, you can tap someone on the shoulder and say, I have a conversation and be like, hey, can I educate you about my city? Can I educate you about the number of Black-owned businesses here? Can I educate you about the number of Black homeowners here? Can I educate you about the number of, Black degree holders and advanced degree holders? Can I educate you blah, 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 right? And so I think that is how we change the narrative and become ambassadors, and that's free. Those are just conversations.
So with all of that said, guys, we're going to wrap up today. We had a great conversation. Obviously, being about it also means educating folks about your city, about what they can do so that they can make a change. And we're going to also continue to try to make a change in Detroit in our various professions. So I would like to say, tune in for our next episode where we will hopefully have more folks in the conversation who are urbanists in Detroit. So that's all from the Block Under Construction. Bye.
Peace.
Peace.